So now we're going to talk about one of my favorite methods for actually coming up with new story ideas in Nanowrimo, or actually anytime, because coming up with story ideas is so much fun. Now this method is called the what if method, and in my case I'm referring to this as the what if negative, because it requires that you think of a story. Doesn't matter what genre, you can adapt this to any genre. You think of a story that aggravated you, that ticked you off, it made you mad, it did something, and it didn't do it well. There are many of those in my life. I try to handle them with grace and remember that not everyone makes decisions like me, but sometimes you see things that other people missed, and it would have been so amazing if they had remembered to take advantage of them. Now, here is going to be an example, and it's got a little bit of a spoiler. This is for the Jack Ryan series. I will try not to reveal too much, but I will include a timestamp in case you want to skip ahead. In the Jack Ryan series, it is clear that this man is tormented over the death of a child extremist. It's brought up multiple times. It is also brought up that this young man in the story, who we see at multiple points, is becoming an extremist. Sort of. They could have done a better job of establishing that, but we can tell that's what's happening. Anyway, the problem is that even though the question is asked multiple times, can he be saved? Is this child going to become like his father? All of those things, even though it's asked, at the end of the day, this child is given zero agency. It never comes up in a relevant way. He is a pawn in the story, and he's not at an age where he should be a pawn. In fact, it's ridiculous even the way he gets taken out of the story so that he can just be handed over like a piece of baggage to the person who is searching for him. And this takes place in the climax. Now, overall, I found the climax to be rather anticlimactic, and I'm not enormously pleased with that because there were so many opportunities. Again, Jack Ryan gave me a lot of fodder for things to contemplate, and it wasn't all bad, but I'm not going to do a review on it right now. Anyway, what needed to happen for what they were setting up is that it needed to be addressed. What is this young man going through? He needed to be given some choice, and ideally he needed to have a key moment in the end where the ability to choose, am I going to be like my father, or am I going to go after my mother, or in a different way entirely, because there weren't really great role models for the others, but something where he has to make a choice. He has to do something active, because there's actually phenomenal conflict here. In general, here's my side note on the Jack Ryan story. Jack Ryan really wasn't that important to the Jack Ryan story. Not that John Krasinski did a bad job, but in general, the most interesting conflict was between the father and the mother, and these culture clashes that they're going through, and the differences in the ideologies, and what do the parents want for their children, and why do they want it, and it could have been handled much better. So, that has given me many ideas. That means that I'm going to, at some point, have a character who is really quite young, who must make that choice, and who will at one point in the story's climax have the opportunity to make a decisive and transformative decision that will impact the whole world. And see, that gives me something to work with. Now, there's a lot of ways that you can handle this when you're coming up with your different ideas. I think it can be helpful to actually go outside of your genre in some respects, but you don't have to. You will need to make sure that you have a world that's set up to accommodate this. Now, in my example of, okay, what if a child who is being pushed toward extremism is put into a situation where a definitive choice must be made, and there are these certain factors, X, Y, Z. Well, I can set that in almost any world. So there I have lots of freedom. In other situations, though, you might find that you are a little bit more, I would say, you're a little bit more restricted in terms of what you can actually do, because the idea in and of itself might require, say, magic or science. For instance, if you did a what if with, say, Star Trek, you're probably, unless it's one of the ones where they're stuck on a planet, going to have some element of space travel, unless you just remove it entirely, and you can do that. The thing that you need to watch for is you don't want to take too much. We all draw inspiration from many different places, but we don't want to just outright copy people. It's not polite, and besides, we do better when we start adding to the stories, when we start adding to the characters. So maybe take an idea, and if you're having a hard time figuring out what else to do, then look at another place and play what if there, and you can do this completely randomly. And if you're having a hard time, then say, throw in about 20 little strips of paper with the lists of the books and movies and TV shows you've recently seen. And as you pull one out, just randomly choose a, what if this happened? What if Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth never got together? Oh, I know I would get I'll get so much hate for that one if I brought that up in one of the Austen groups. But what would happen? What would happen to Elizabeth? And then take it out of the context of that story and create a world where that would make sense. You could take, say, an easy one would be any story and the bad guys win. Or if it's a story in which the good guys lose and the bad guys win, switch it around. Just swap them. Swap the outcomes and see the ideas that come. Now, personally, I'd recommend maybe mind mapping this, and I'll go into more of that later if you don't know what that is. But you just want to go through and come up with all the crazy ideas that you can, and then you start putting it together and constructing a world. What makes this a lot of fun to do with friends or other writers is that even if you all agree on what could have done better, you won't necessarily agree on what is the best thing to move the story forward or what would have been a better alternative. And so you can get all sorts of ideas. And before you know it, you're going to wind up with a completely different story, particularly if you keep analyzing the story, the characters, the world, and you start adding in other elements. So that's all for this one, and for today, why don't you tell me a story that in some way made you go, well, what if that had been done differently, and it would have been so much better. Hopefully this gives you some ideas, and I will be talking to you soon. Bye.